Thanks for being here. I've been to SOAP once last year, and I couldn't speak because I was too late in sending in a proposal, but I love to speak. I love to give people a little peek into my crazy head and just maybe unlock your imagination. Right, that's my main aim in life, is to unlock people's imagination. So what I'm going to talk about today is extreme single sourcing. There's something else in the program. There's another title, but this is really what it is. And I made one typo because the E should be small and the X should be large, just like, you know, I'm an ex-millennial, right? So just a little bit about me. This is me. I'm still in there. It's 59 years ago that I looked like this. I studied physics, psychology, philosophy, and then, you gotta have a job. And, there was no jobs for philosophers in Netherlands, so I taught myself programming. First tech writing, and then programming, and now I program all kinds of crazy stuff. It's all in the domain of technical documentation, and especially in reuse, but we'll come to that. So, my company is called Smart Information Design. It's a one-person company. And as it says here at the end, I'm addicted to challenge. If it isn't difficult, then I'm bored out of my skull. So but I try to make the difficult stuff easy for you guys, because not everybody is addicted to challenge. Well, not challenge in the workplace. Since like a week, basically, the Coda Systems company in Chicago, based in Chicago, they hire my services full-time to head their development team. So basically now I'm still doing smart information design, but I'm doing it under the name of Dakota Systems. So if you want to have my business card later on, you'll see Dakota. That's the reason why. It's since a week. That's back. Let's go forward. There we go. So what I'm going to talk about is there's a lot of documentation that has product data, right? I mean, some of you will have these kinds of data sheets with lots of product data in it. And the product data is different for every product. These are just sheets that I took off the internet for, there's a company who produces paints, industrial paints. So for paints, industrial paints, you have to know a lot of data before you actually decide to purchase that paint to put on an airplane. It's not like your everyday, the Home Depot kind of paint, right? It's industrial paints. So you have lots of information, and guess how that information is put in there? The tech author gets the file, and then they look up the data in a database, and then they copy it into the data sheet, right? That's copy-paste. That's painful. I tell people, if I see somebody's fingers hovering over the Control-C key, I cut them off. That is how I feel about copy-paste. Because it's not what you want to do. You want to reference it, you want to reuse stuff, you want to have your information only live in one place, because then you only need to maintain it in that one place. So what people then started doing is to remove the data from the data sheets and then push it into the appendix. So in the data sheet or in the procedure, for example, there's no specific data anymore. Everything is referenced. They tell the user, okay, you can find all the specific in the appendix. And then you have these appendices of like 200 pages, 10,000 of cells, etc. And then the user, their finger, they have like a little Parkinson, so they cannot track it. And they get the wrong part and the machine blows up. And they're on the phone like, hey, I put the part in. Which one? That one. No, that's the column next to it, right? So this is, from a user experience point of view, from a usability point of view of your documentation, this is a really bad solution. But everybody's doing it because it was so painful to copy that data into the data sheets manually, right? So we have DITA. I like DITA. I'm using DITA all the time. I'm using conrefs. Well, actually, I don't stop using conrefs. I'm using conkeyrefs because everything should have key in it. Except what I'm going to show you, you don't need that anymore. So how does this help the problem? The conkeyref. Does it help the problem? Does it solve the problem? You think so? No, because you have to create this separate topic where all those values for the concrete ref are. So you're still copy pasting them from the product database into your special topic that you can then use as a lookup table. It just moves the problem elsewhere. It's still as painful as before, right? So what you really want to do is you want to pull the data out of the product database, because that's where that somebody else maintains that data in the database. That's where your data lives, right? Large corporations, they all have product databases. That's where the product data should live. That's where it should be pulled out from automatically when you publish, right? That's where my crazy thinking came in. Yes, this really happened. I did this presentation 2 years ago at DITA Europe, and I introduced DITA. We all know DITA, right? And she was feeling a little lonely and a little outdated every once in a while, and a little old-fashioned and not live. And then she asked me, I'm the matchmaker, and I found her a good candidate who is always up to date. So, from the looks in their eyes, you can see that they're not yet sure whether this was a good idea. But I think it is. We're going to see what their kids are going to look like. Right? Not today. It's just really fresh. They're still in their kind of honeymoon, or not yet. But that's what happened. So, what I created in this marriage of DITA with data is something I call DCQL, which is basically the DITA cascading query language. Okay, is that interesting enough? Does that wake you up now after the lunch break? So what I do is I add database queries into the DITA content, which means that now if you republish your content and the data has changed in your database, then it just pulls in the new data. Because your data is not copy-pasted anymore, it's just referenced. Right? It's just like a conref, but now it becomes what I call a data ref. Right? Then, of course, nobody really likes SQL. Is there anyone here who likes SQL? I mean, you say, yeah, sure, I like it. It's like, hey, I can live with it. I can endure it. It's not like, hey, you know what? Tonight, I'm not gonna go to the bar. I'm gonna do SQL. Yay! Right? That's not how it is. So SQL is it is unnecessarily complex, right? If you put the wrong kind of single quote, they have two kinds of single quote, and you have to use these on that position and these on that position. Otherwise, nothing works, right? It's nasty. So I created this simplified query syntax because you don't need the full SQL in pulling a data item out of a database into your content. You don't really need that. I assemble the full queries from snippets because that's where it becomes useful, is where you do not repeat the entire SQL query in every element that you want to pull out of the database. Usually you're talking about a certain product, so you have product data, which is one table, and then you pull the name and the price and the dimensions, and it's all the same table. So why would you repeat all of that? And it's using familiar cascading rules, so everybody knows about cascading and inheritance, and there you go. Right? It's as simple as it can be. As I said, you can resolve this at publish time, but you can even keep the database link alive in your HTML5 output. So now if a user refreshes their HTML page and something has changed in your product database, they get the new data without even having to republish. So let's have a look at what that looks like. In the map is where I define the data sources. This is where I define how to get access to the data source, where it lives. And in this case, I have a handler, a PHP process, that says, okay, that's the PHP process, the active component that talks to the actual SQL database, right? It could be any other database. You can abstract from which database you actually have, but it's just a connection to a web-based interface to your SQL database. it says DB type SQL, then there's a user ID, password, and then it says, okay, this is all within the DITA rules. Yeah, this is the specialization of the key def. And in there you say, okay, when I create a PDF, so I use the delivery target attribute. When I produce a PDF, then it doesn't make sense to do anything but unpublish, refresh, right? Because that's when the PDF gets frozen. So that's when you want to resolve the query. In HTML, you could do it on load. You know, loading the page, that's when you resolve the query and people get new data even though you haven't republished. I even have created a small proof of concept where if my engineer has logged in on the HTML page and they see a mistake in the data, in the database, they log in and they can edit the content in their browser. They push a button and it pushes it back into the database. You know, why make life hard when you can make it easy, right? So, how do you get data out of it? So you have the data sources defined in the map. How do you get data out of that data source? Well, you have a data ref, as I mentioned, and I must say in the demo that I'm going to show you, because I'm actually going to show you that this works on my magic desktop here, right? I have a magic mouse, so I also need a magic desktop, because this doesn't work on a normal desktop. I'll show you in a minute. So, in my actual demo, I'm using the base attribute, so I didn't actually create the specialization yet, but this is what it's going to look like. So you have a data ref attribute, and data ref attribute has a get, and then you say source, SQL database, table, product data, fields, item name, price, stock, order name, first name, and then stock. You know, this is a simplified SQL query, right? Everybody can understand this one, right? No quotes, no single quotes, no any quotes. I put this in the data source, and then this is how you then pull a whole table into your topic. You do specify one header line, you know, a header row, and then you specify one empty body row because that allows you to dimension your table and to style it, etc. But the actual data that's going to be flowing in will come from the database. If you want to get only part of a filter, then it's very easy. You just add a filter. You know, filter on size equals, or in this case, size higher than 5, lower than 15. There you go. That's how easy you can make it, right? I'm going to show you those in real-life demos in a couple of minutes. Now, pulling a table out of a database is not something really special. You know, there's lots of companies doing that already with specialized transforms out of a table. They just create those appendices with all the tables. You know, a table is not really very challenging. It becomes interesting when you want to have a single field out of your database, like the product name or the product or the price, etc. And you want to enter that in your DITA content, in the running text. And that's where you have a phrase element in DITA, can be any piece of text. And I want to pull this piece of text out of the database instead of copy-pasting it in, right? And that's where the cascading rules come in very handy, because you don't want to, if I look back at the can I go back with this? Doesn't go back. Okay, so with a table, you put the whole query in that one data ref. That's not a big issue because you're basically, you know, capturing an entire table, and you want to put the order in there, etc. But if you have an individual phrase, then you set the context by saying, okay, I'm going to, first of all, in the body, you see that here, data ref, filter ID 1001. I'm talking about item with the ID 1001. It might have this ID if you have a well-organized SQL database. It will have that ID in various tables, right? So then in one section where I'm going to talk about this part, I can say, okay, now I'm going to talk about table product data. With the cascading rules, the filter ID 1001 is still valid because it all adds up. You know, like cascading rules do, it inherits whatever is on their parents, unless you override it. So, within the table product data, I have a field name and I have a field part. So then my sentence becomes, the, and that's where I put the name field in there, has part number, and then I put the part field in there. It's really fairly simple. Once you see it, you go like, okay, why didn't we do this in the first place? Well, that's my mind anyway. So you have the cascading queries, as I indicated. So in my data ref specialization, you have two options. You have set, which doesn't pull any data in, but it just sets the context or part of the context. And you have get, and in get you pull the data out of the database. Right? I couldn't really imagine anything simpler. If somebody has an idea to make it simpler, then please come talk to me afterwards, because we're going to make it simpler. Right? Okay.
If you ever want it localized into some languages, you have to make it a bit simpler.
Localized into languages.
Yes. Because this construction, no, I'm talking natural languages, because this construction is not translatable. Not fully translatable.
That's a different kind of problem that we're not going to tackle with the this data stuff. Okay, so if you have, obviously, if it is if a product name has different kinds of conjugations, etc., then obviously you need to solve that problem in a different kind of way. But the part number. Yeah, sure.
This way, but a little bit differently, and then it will work.
Okay, we'll talk about it later. Let's stick with the English. Let's stick with the basic concept here. So. In this case, I have two different sections. One section talks about product data. It refers to the table product data. The other section talks about a maintenance table, but they both use the same ID, which means that the ID will be put somewhere higher up. And then I can still, as you see here in the get field name XY1001, you can still pull another item out of the same table by overriding the filter ID 1001. It becomes filter ID 42. Because cascading rules, you can always override the inherited field from higher up, right? So after doing this with a SQL database, because most databases on this planet are SQL still today, I think, even though corporations are moving away from SQL, I guess because they find it overly complicated. There's a bunch of XML databases. There's Exist and BaseX, and there's a couple more. So I was wondering, could I do something similar with XML? And the answer is sure. Why not? Because XML uses XQuery, or XQuery allows you to process XML databases. And XQuery works with an XPath. An XPath is a string. Hey, I can piece together little snippets of strings and then just concatenate them, and I have a full XPath, right? So that would look like this. You say, okay, I have the source is an XML database. In that XML database, I look for, and the double slash says, I don't know where it is, but just look for any element that has a tag product and its ID equals 42. So assuming that I have organized my XML database in the right kind of way, then all of my data about product 42 will be in that section of XML, right? So I zoom in on that product first. Inside of the product element in my database, I will have a name. So I get name / text. I don't want to have the name element, but only the text of it. And I can still override I see that I have ID 42 twice here. That was, of course, that's a typo. It should have been like 1001 up there and 42 down here. But you can figure that one out. You can even override parts of the XPath by using a double period. Backtrack one and then go back in another branch, etc. You can do everything you can do in XPath, right? You run this on an XML database. It's basically the same thing as with the SQL database, with a SQL query. So apart from the DCQL, I tried to first Googled CQL instead of SQL, Like, you say SQL, but then with me it's a sequel, right? But that's already taken. That's the Cassandra query language for the Cassandra, Apache Cassandra database. So I couldn't use that. It's already taken. So then I added the D for DITA, and then it's, the DITA Cascading query language. And now I also have the DCXQL, the DITA Cascading XQuery language, right? So we have these advanced options. I'm working on these. These have not been coded yet, but it's easy to see how I can make that work. Here you can use a variable inside of your DITA content and then say, okay, this variable gets that value, and then I reference that value in my XPath in expressions. So you can basically use the power of XPath in your queries inside of your DITA content. And what happens basically is that you remove the need to copy paste from any data source into your DITA content before you publish. So you make a live link, and then you decide that it's going to be refreshed at publish time. You can even set so the context doesn't stop at the topic level, right? So you could actually put the context, some of the context, like the ID of the part that you're talking about, you could put that in the map. And then you have the same topic that's replicated a number of times using DITA file and branch filtering and all kinds of stuff. You could actually put the ID in the map, and then you don't ever have to touch your topic, even if your part number changes for a different kind of machinery. Right? So it's really about less work and more flexibility in your output. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to activate my Magic Desktop. If you bear with me 2 seconds. 1, 2. We have a magic mouse on the Magic Desktop. This is my computer here. So we have DCQL. This is the first example that I showed you of reading a table into my DITA content. This is a DITA topic. I can actually, it says here DITA, right? Table.DITA. If it says .DITA, it's DITA, right? Everyone believes that? Well, I can actually, go to the XML view in FrameMaker. I'm doing this demo in FrameMaker for 2 reasons. First is that I'm here, sponsored by Adobe because I'm known as the frame tamer. I do all kinds of crazy programming for FrameMaker, and they have me here to solve your FrameMaker related problems or non-FrameMaker related problems, like about life, the universe, and everything. And what you can see here is it's a little small, but let me try to make it larger like that. Here you can see this is a query, and as I said, I'm not using the specialization data ref yet, but I'm using the base attribute. So base equals get table product info, fields ID, name, size, price, order, ID. And this turns into a full table. If I go back to WYSIWYG, because this is what most technical authors like much better. That's why, I made it available I did the whole work in Oxygen first, and then I made it available in FrameMaker, because this is what a lot of people are using, especially non-geeks. And I click on Get SQL Data, and then it runs a transform that pulls the data out of my database, which is on my machine, and it's served through this little PHP server. Now, I don't have a magic keyboard here, so I just prepared a filtered DITA table, which has the same kind of information in it, except that now I added this one little thing here, filter on size equals 3 liter, right? That's the only thing I changed from one topic to the other. You can actually see this. Let's enlarge this one too, so it's easier to see. And then this one is with the filter, and this one is without the filter. That's the only change in that file, right? And if I do, let's go back to WYSIWYG, and if I do get SQL data and this one, then you will see that the resulting table is much smaller because you're filtering out some stuff. It's basically using the basic SQL techniques to get some data out of a database. Now, as I said, pulling a table, that's not very special because a lot of people, they invest some time into really creating those large tables out of databases anyway. It becomes more interesting if you have a single phrase like this is product X. If I run this query here, then it will give me the name of that product, which it took out of the SQL database as well. You can see the actual coding here again in the XML view. This is where I say set source data 1, set filter ID 02220, table product info, get fields name. There you go. That's how easy it works. And of course it becomes more interesting even if I have this whole data sheet where I have multiple entries and there's the cascading rules are being used here, etc. This section talks about table physical, and then further down you get the table. So this section, let me see, this is table physical, and then here you have table product info, but it's all related to the same ID. And the only product ID I put is right here at the top. Right. So this data sheet, this is what you saw in the beginning, or something similar to that. The data sheet is only made with placeholders. And then when I set the ID, and then I do the SQL data, the transform, it pulls the data out of the database and the whole data sheet is filled in with the data. Now, if something changes in your database, then the only thing you need to do as a tech author in this organization is republish the whole thing. You don't even have to open those topics anymore. You just open the DITA map that holds all the topics and say, go do it. Create my new 500-page catalog of all the paints that we have, because nothing factual has changed except what's changed in the database. No actual description has changed, right? Very often that is the case. The only reason why tech authors in those companies are running up against their deadlines is that they have to copy-paste all of those items from the database into their 1,000 topics in a DITA map. And then the last little demo that I have here, that I have prepared, is this is showing the XQuery stuff, just to show you that this is not just a fairy tale, but it actually works. Oh, let me go to XML view first. There we go. So you can see here, it's a it's a stupidly simple example, but this is actually showing what happens here. In this topic, here I set the path. So in this particular topic, I'm assuming I already set the database source. It's a certain XML document in my database. So normally I would also have that in my code. But you can assume that this is already one particular XML document or XML database. So here I set the root. So from the root, I take the paint section. I set the ID 15400 here, and here I get the name, and here I set another ID, and I get the name that. So if you concatenate those little pieces of XPath together, you get a full query, and that is resolved in running the XSLT, the transform of that data source. So if we go here, and then of course in this case I'm running an XML data, or against an XML database. If I do this, then it will fill out the data with two different paint names. Even though basically the sections are the same, the only difference between those two is the ID. So that is basically the demo that I wanted to show you. Which means that we are at, this is going back again, right? There we go. The question, are there any queries? Of course, you got to stay within the theme, right? Do we need microphones for for people to ask questions.
I'm here. I'm
Any
sorry,
questions?
I'm late. Okay, questions. Yes, we have questions. Awesome.
This guy. Oh, it's not working. You got to shout. Ah, just shout.
Oh, I can shout.
He's on
That's
mute.
all right for me.
Oh,
it is.
there you go.
Okay. Thanks. I'm Tom from Xtoris Malta. I wanted to ask you, is this actually currently only implemented as a FrameMaker element? Are you planning to develop this into some kind of an open source solution, like, for example, to be used in my case, I work with Oxygen and with DITA OT, which would be like the perfect place to implement this. Are there any plans?
Well, DITA OT, obviously, you know, that it would be nice to have some kind of plug-in there. I don't know if I will have the time, the unpaid time to develop it, but it might be one option. It works in Oxygen. You know, I first made it work in Oxygen. I made it work in FrameMaker. Obviously, what I still want to do, and that makes it into a product, which will probably not be open source because, you know, we got to all make a living. What I still need to do is to make an easy, author-friendly way of actually putting the query in. Because typing it in there, for me, that's still too painful, right? So instead of that, you will have, and that will, you know, we will see for which products we can make that happen. You know, I'm trying to do that development with Dakota Systems. So just connect with me and I'll keep you posted. There's got to be a way to get into, to do the query. You know, as you do the query, it basically looks over your shoulder and it puts the right hooks into your data source without you ever having an XML view open. Right? That is the ideal that I have in my head, because then it becomes really useful. What people are doing now is they look up the data in their database interface and then they punch in the data, the actual item. Instead of that, they will leave that whole interface behind. They will just go through an interface that keeps track of what they are doing and puts it in those attributes. You know, then it becomes a real product. And then, of course, it depends on Dakota and their planning, etc., what price tag and which platforms we're going to support.
Hey, hello, Jang.
Hi.
So I got a question about the all those queries, because you just mentioned that you need an easier way of entering queries. Have you considered using a database framework, you know, kind of like Hibernate or Entity Framework or something, which, you know, exposes the data as an object? So then the queries are easier because you just say product, and then in your field you say name, here you say value or cost or whatever.
The only possible technical problem I would see with that is, are these frameworks also accessible through a simple, straightforward XSL transform? If they're not, then that's a knockout criterion, because what you do is you tap into the transform that we're already doing in transforming your data content into PDF or HTML5. Now, if it cannot be part of that transform, then it's not going to be useful.
Yeah, so you can do that with a jar attached to, say, DITA OT. So then you would call the jar to execute the thing for you, and you get your interface into XML. So I think
yeah, and that's an option to look at a later stage. You know, this is just past the stage of, you know, 2 years ago or 1.5 years ago, it was a crazy idea. You know, everybody laughed at data marrying data, right? And now it's like, hey, you know, this marriage could actually work, right? So this is the proof of concept. It works in Oxygen, works in FrameMaker. The user interface, that's the next step. And obviously those kinds of technologies will come into play at that point.
Sure, and I just want to say I'm not so smart to have come up with this on the spot, because I used to implement these kinds of things before in DITA OT with the team, right? Not just me. So that's why I know, like, a framework would be easier.
Yeah, possibly.
Oh, hi. I really like your idea. Thanks for the question. What's going on? Oh yeah, I know, but I raised my hand beforehand. I mean,
Yeah, that's okay.
Go
That's okay.
sorry, I just
Go
couldn't
on
see
with
it.
the question.
Yeah, real quick. Really like your idea, but I've been thinking. So I guess you chose DITA because Dakota work they work in DITA, right? And you had this issue of pulling data from the database. Well, like Pavel asked you about Hibernate and stuff like that. Is there any actual benefit? I mean, maybe another level of abstraction, so that, for example, if you use Thymeleaf or some other generators that are used in software to generate the front end with database queries, and work strictly directly in HTML. There are other frameworks to transform HTML into PDF. What I mean is you immediately get the front-end application that already exists. Are there any additional benefits that you could see of using this in DITA, straight in DITA, rather than just focusing on HTML and then transforming pure HTML eventually into PDF, stuff like that?
Basically, the whole question of user interfaces into different kinds of databases and querying systems, etc., is something that's the next step to look at. What I do not want to do explicitly, what I never ever try to do explicitly, is from the very start build on a framework without knowing that I can also do without. I go for simplicity, so it's a pure concept first, and then we look at, okay, how can we now use frameworks to leverage what we're doing? If it doesn't work without those frameworks, then I don't really understand the concepts of it. I can build wonderful websites based on what have you, WordPress, etc., but then I will always hit a brick wall if I try to do something that was not supported by the framework. And then going through those JavaScript libraries to try and fix that, because it's all open source, etc., but it's all unreadable open source, usually. So I tend to stay away from these frameworks as much as I possibly can until I get the real strong concept, and then I start slowly bringing in potential candidates. I never start straight with those. It would be easier, yeah, it's easier, but then you hit a rock wall and then it's going to be terrible. But that's my strategy anyway. I think there was one question in the back there.
Yeah.
Yes, hello, Tomek Dolby, Wrocław, and here is my query. I clearly understand the concept of having the database locally at your company when you are creating on-publish in an on-publish way that you've mentioned. However, I was interested in the other workflow that you've also mentioned, like on load when the content is available online. So how do you solve the problem when, for instance, your customers would like to see the up-to-date information online and the database is pretty huge? And how do you deliver that? How do you solve this?
Yes. Well, there's I already created. I don't show them here because that's more elaborate work, etc. And I only have limited scope, and I wanted to concentrate on these aspects. I do have transforms that create the HTML5, and as they create the HTML5, they resolve the query so that you have at least some data in there in case somebody, their web connection might not be as strong to run all those queries live, but it will also put the whole query into the HTML and then add a JavaScript that uses an AJAX call to get the query, to run the query on load, right? And I even have this option where you keep it alive, which means that you could do polling or pushing, that's different kinds of things that you can do. It's that basically just is technology, and it's sitting down and doing the hard work. Usually these kinds of ideas, it's 2% is the inspiration, and there's 10 more percent really thinking it through, and then there's 80% transpiration of actually doing the coding. But I'm not afraid of that part. That can be done because we have created all kinds of software. It's just a matter of not being lazy. Just keep going until you got it done. So I have that transform at least in one form. I don't have it for the DITA Open Toolkit yet. Whether that happens or not depends on a whole number of factors. Got to make a living first, and then look at that.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Yang. Thank you so much.
Thank you.